3 or so weeks ago, I was talking to Mark Cheverels downstairs, and the conversation got around to the old Fliers group, and I talked about the experience and background of a lot of the members here. And Mark said to me, have you spoken to Caroline Wynton-Rhodes? And I said, no, why should I? He said, she's got some surprises she can tell you about. So I went to see Caroline, and she certainly did give me some surprises. I don't want to preempt anything she's about to tell you, but I'm sure that you'll be surprised too. I'd just like to let you know that she spent a lifetime in aviation. She's got just short of 26,000 hours in a logbook, and she's got some very interesting connections who you're going to hear about in the next few minutes. Thank you. Carol, step forward.
From my grandfather, and then just lightly talk about my father for a couple of seconds. So first of all, as Brian has said, I am an aviator. I've been flying since 1964. I was born in 1946, and considering the background that I have with a father and a grandfather, both pilots in aviation, it's not surprising that I followed in their footsteps. My grandfather was a fighter pilot during World War I and during World War II, and he started off in the Navy, and later in World War II he went into the Air Force. My father, on the other hand, though, only went into the Air Force. But it's, as far as my history is concerned, as I said, I started flying in 1964, and this was the aeroplane I learned to fly on. It's known as the Flt.Lt Canuck. It's a Canadian-built aeroplane, a very simple trainer. In fact, this aeroplane was actually manufactured in 1946, the same year that I was manufactured and created. Having completed my flying training in Canada, I returned to the United Kingdom, and I started flying such aeroplanes as a Chipmunk. As you know, a very nice training aeroplane, and not only did I just fly these machines, eventually I got myself an instructor's rating and started to teach people on how to fly these as well. This is a Cessna 337. And those people who have actually been to Rhodesia will probably recognize it. But before I went out to Rhodesia, in fact, I obtained a short service commission in the Royal Air Force. I was in air traffic, and at the end of the 5 years, and being disillusioned with the then government in the United Kingdom, I decided I'd go off to Africa and get myself a little bit of excitement. And as a result, I went over there and I started working for the Ian Smith regime, and I ended up flying an aeroplane like this, doing recce work. That was pretty good to start with, but it got more interesting, in fact, when I started flying these beasties. Oh yeah, the old Goody Bird, and I flew these for 3 years. One of the nicest aeroplanes I've ever flown. Absolutely fabulous machine. If anyone's got any experience on these machines, they know exactly what I'm talking about. Of course, as I said, it was all during the period of UDI. Oh yeah, what did I do with these machines? Gun running, a little bit of gun running, a little bit of food smuggling, gold running, anything at all that we could bust sanctions with. And I'm still doing it. Right, anyway, I left Africa in 1978. I returned to the United Kingdom, and I decided it might be a good idea if I did some proper civil flying and become a professional aviator. So I eventually got myself a commercial license and instrument rating, and the first job I had was flying these PA-31s or Chieftains, twin-engine piston, and that was fine. Good little number, and then eventually I ended up flying the old Viscount. The old Viscount. And this one is actually, in fact, at Cardiff Airport, Cambrian Airways. But I didn't fly those for Cambrian. I flew them for a company called, oh, I can't remember now. I'm having a senior moment.
We all have those.
Yeah, we all have them, don't we? That's right. It was a company down in Southend, British Air Ferries, operating these Viscounts out of there. Having achieved my first officership on these things, I eventually went on to the Embraer 120. It was a 36-seater, twin turboprop. Didn't like these at all. I don't like and cannot understand why anyone wants to put a propeller on a jet engine. So I decided to leave those and went off to fly the old Boeing 737-200. Far better aeroplane. And I flew these for a number of years. I started flying the 737 in 1979. I went through the various stages, the old 300, 400, and eventually I retired in 2001, 4 days before 9/11, and that was it. I put my feet up, I said, I'm not going to fly again. However, that didn't last for very long. I became a flying instructor. I did various jobs as a flying instructor, and now look where I am. I'm over here in Western Australia to teach you Aussies how to fly airplanes. So as I said, why did I become a pilot? Is it in my genetics? Is it from the influence of father and grandfather? Well, I'm not so sure, because my grandfather didn't have that much of an influence in my life. But originally he applied to the Air Force in 1914. He was turned down because he was too frail. So he reapplied to the Navy and he was accepted. And here is my grandfather, Theodore Osterkamp. And here he is with his aeroplane. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, the opposition. During World War I, he flew for the Imperial German Navy, and he proved himself to be quite successful. This was the aeroplane he was flying towards the end of the war, just as you saw in the other photograph, and it's the old Fokker D8. And it was one of the first single-wing or monoplane aeroplanes to be used. During his time in the Air Force, or in the Imperial Navy, I should say, he became a friend of this guy. What's it called? Hermann Göring. He became a friend of Hermann Göring. And during his time, he also, or so rumor has it, was that he met the Red Baron. But he did go on, though, to have a lot of experience in aerial combat, and as a result of the numerous, should I say, kills of World War I, he was eventually awarded Pour le Mérite, the Blue Max. And of all the medals this man ever received, this was his favorite. All the medals he earned in World War II, none compared to this. In addition, he was awarded the Iron Cross First Class, the Iron Cross Second Class, and of course his pilot wings. Pilot wings, which I have here, all from World War I. I have his Iron Cross First Class. All these were left to me when he died. And of course, his simple Iron Cross Second Class. Now, between the wars, when the war was over, it was just like a number of other Germans at that time. They felt hard done by the French through the Treaty of Versailles. And as a result, he decided that what else could he do other than to fight the Bolsheviks. He had a complete hatred of them. And as a result, between the two wars, he ended up fighting 2 wars against the Bolsheviks. One of them, of course, was in Spain, and there was the earlier one as well. Now, during the first conflict he was having against the Bolsheviks, his old friend here, old Herman, had been keeping an eye on him and thought, this guy seems to hate Bolsheviks as much as we do. And when Hitler came to power in 1933, old Herman here decided he'd go look up his old friend Theo and see if he could get together with him and see if they could use him. Obviously, an anti-Bolshevik must be pro-us. So he was, to learn later, quite the opposite. My grandfather, there he is. He was awarded, initially when he joined the Luftwaffe in 1934, or what was to become the Luftwaffe, and he spent a lot of his time with Göring reorganizing and bringing into being the Luftwaffe as it was to be in 1939. In 1939, in this photograph, in fact, this photograph was taken in 1940, but in 1939 he was taken on as an Oberst or Colonel in the Luftwaffe, and eventually he was to take over Jag 51, which was later become known as Mulder Squadron, and he participated quite actively in the Battle of Britain. He did succeed in a number of victories during that period of time, and he was once again awarded some decorations and honours. In 1940, when this photograph was taken, he was promoted to the rank of Major General and awarded his Knight's Cross. When the signal came through, or notification came through, that he had in fact been awarded this Knight's Cross, his unit, his NCOs got together, they dug out an old Iron Cross second class, and they converted it for him so that he could wear this Iron Cross around his neck. That Iron Cross, did I bring it? Yes, I did. There it is. That Iron Cross second class has been converted so that it could be worn around the neck. And that was given to him by his men, and he hung on to that for the rest of his time in the Luftwaffe. A very, very important item that he felt was so important to him. Then he went to Berlin, and he was presented to Adolf, and he was then awarded his Knight's Cross. And as you can see here, there is the Knight's Cross itself, and he was awarded that on, as it says there, the 22nd of August 1940, when he had achieved a number of victories as a fighter pilot during the Battle of Britain. As the war went on, so he received other decorations as well, and in 1941 he received this one, which is the Gold Cross, and as you can see, there it is. I hold all these medals. I am not, I have to say, an advocate of what it represents, but I certainly am proud to say that I have a grandfather who earned medals during that period of time. Now, my grandfather, as I said, he was born in Germany. He went into the Navy, later into the Luftwaffe, and he commanded JG 51, where he stayed as a fighter pilot, as I said, in the Battle of Britain. Before he had gone there, in fact, to gain a military experience and fighting experience, he became a member of the Condor Legion. And he fought in the Condor Legion alongside people like Galland and others, where he achieved success fighting the Spanish alongside the Franco troops. These medals here, I'm not sure if that's been very clear, but anyway, those are the ones he earned and won in Spain. The two others there are his 4-year and 12-year service medals, and of course, one Iron Cross second class. At the end of, in 1941 as well, he was relieved of his command of JG1 by the German ace Mulders, and eventually Mulders was killed. My grandfather went back to take over that squadron until he was replaced, and in 1942 he commanded the Luftwaffe headquarters in Brussels. In 1942 it was my grandfather's 50th birthday. So Adolf Galland decided that he would say to my grandfather, happy 50th birthday. So he jumped into his Messerschmitt, got a whole pile of stolen champagne out of Paris, and a whole pile of lobsters, flew to Brussels, and they decided to have a bit of a party. So there he is going off in his Messerschmitt with his ground crew, and they arrived for my grandfather's 50th birthday. My grandfather can be seen here, standing next to Adolf Galland, And there's Rudel and a couple of others in there whom I don't know, not particularly interested, but Galland and my grandfather were close friends. So anyway, as we can see, they had the party, and I think as every party would be dumb if you had no hands. We all speak with our hands when we're talking flying. No hands, we no speak. And of course, it makes no difference whether it was a German mess, or whether it was the Italian mess, or a Royal Air Force, or Australian mess. We all talk about the same sort of thing. This could be anywhere. Now, this photograph, or this painting, was unbelievable. When my grandfather was actually flying during the Battle of Britain, he came back a couple of times with his aeroplane shot up. And I came across this photograph, this painting, and this, believe it or not, is my grandfather's aeroplane in this painting. And he's actually been shot up. And he actually told me he'd been shot up on a few occasions, but he flew home, he got home safely. Later on, he transferred to North Africa back in later on in 1942, and he started flying Focke-Wulf 190s out there, but he didn't do that for very long. He eventually became the officer commanding Sicily, and over there he was flying the good stuff, the ME-109G. He liked this aeroplane very much, and as I said, he was the officer commanding Sicily for the Luftwaffe. However, at this stage of the game, Germany was on a losing streak. North Africa had been cleared of the Germans, and they were looking now to cross the Mediterranean and to pound the Germans in Sicily. So Galland came along and said, I don't want this Theo Osterkamp here anymore, I can do a better job. So as a result, my grandfather was posted out of Sicily back to Germany. In the meantime, Kesselring, who was quite a senior officer in the Luftwaffe, was absolutely furious with Galland because he had just removed one of the most experienced fighter pilots from a frontline area. In addition to that, the morale when my grandfather left the area was reduced dramatically. My grandfather was so well respected by the Germans, whether it be an NCO, an officer, or just an ordinary AC Blogs. And that was shown by his nickname. And he was known as Uncle Theo, all the way through. Uncle Theo. When Galland realized he'd made a mistake in the removal of my grandfather from Sicily, he then decided he better do a tour of all the fighter places and all the units to see if he could sort of resolve this problem. Unfortunately for him, he never did, because they missed their Uncle Theo. And Theo at this time was 51 years old, still flying combat missions with people who were less than half his age. Anyhow, at that time anyway, he went back to Germany and he started doing several jobs, and eventually he became the officer commanding the Inspectorate of Logistics. Big deal, from a fighter pilot to shuttling stores around the country and around Europe. Having now returned to Germany, he became very, very concerned about what was really happening. Those on the front line weren't so aware exactly of what was going on. And by this time as well, he'd been demoted from a major general to a general lieutenant. And he started to get very upset, especially with Hermann Goering. So one day he said to Hermann, "Look, sunshine, I don't like what you're doing. I don't like what you're doing here. There's something dreadfully wrong." And they ended up having an almighty row. And Uncle Theo told old Hermann where he could place his Luftwaffe. At that stage in 1944, he was pushing his luck a bit because he could have ended up in front of a firing squad. And I believe it was only because of his relationship with Herman that he got away with just a situation where he was kicked out of the Luftwaffe. And on the 31st of December 1944, they said, you can leave. This was Darren. He's the guy that made it all difficult for my grandfather. He's the one that put him in an office, shuffling things all around Europe. And I want you to have a look at these badges. These are the pilot wings. Now, as I said, on the 31st of December 1944, poor old Theo left. I'm gone. And he went to Baden-Baden. He was so disgusted with Goering and what was happening in the Luftwaffe. Now, these were his wings. He got so cheesed off, he took a file and he filed the swastika. Which I thought was pretty good. I thought that was very good indeed. Anyway, he became the, he went to Baden-Baden. He became the mayor of Baden-Baden, and that's where he stayed until the Allies arrived in 1945. At that point, he gave up his mayorship until the occupying forces turned around and said, look, we need you people to run your own establishment. So they brought him back and they made him mayor again. And as a result, he started to run the town in the same way as he had before the surrender. Now, what the war can do to people. Those of you who have been there, look at this. This is my grandfather, age 52, in 1944. So it goes to show, to a certain extent, that they were suffering. Probably deserved it. But look at him now in 1957, 14 years on. Or, what is it? Yeah, 13 years on. A much healthier looking man. But it does go to show exactly what the people of Germany were going through towards the end of the war. When he died on the 2nd of January 1975, the only thing he had written on his gravestone was, as you see it here, and Paula Merritt. Not Rita Cross, nothing else, just Paula Merritt. That was the medal he always respected throughout his entire life, and that is the one he had placed on his gravestone. Now that basically is the story of my grandfather. Now, of course, and a little bit about myself, the other story, of course, is about my father. Now, that's another story again, because while all this was going on, my father was born in 1916 on the other side of the Channel and was eventually to end up in the Royal Air Force, initially as a flight engineer and later as a pilot flying Sunderlands with the Canadians, where he was shot down on one occasion and was still trying to work out who shot him down. However, he survived and he was to come home, and it has become a very, very interesting story. And what I always do, every November the 11th, not so much in Australia, but certainly in the United Kingdom, I wear the medals I earned in Rhodesia on this side. I wear my father's medals here, his DFC, his AFC, and his war medals. Beneath those, I wear those of my grandfather. Wow. Thank you very much.